I don't know why the people involved in the last negotiations continue to preach that it worked. It almost failed dramatically. So they should stop saying that. It's just not true. Yeah. There's no evidence that any of that retaliation works for Canada.
Apparently, the United States is planning to invade Canada. Yes, our own prime minister actually alluded to that just the other day to the press. What a bizarre thing to say publicly. We've also heard tons of comments over the last year plus of Canada being annexed, the fact that America is a bully under President Trump, and they're untrustworthy and unpredictable, irrational. Well, I decided to sit down with U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra again to ask a lot of these questions point blank. Be sure to like this video, comment your thoughts down below, share it, subscribe to the channel. I'm Jasmine Laine, and let's get into it.
To react and hit back in Canada, we've all seen that over the last 18 months, and it's understandable. But I don't think the American administration particularly cares.
There is not a chance in hell that U.S. alcohol is going back on the shelf in British Columbia, and I'm proud of that.
I got to be honest with you here. I do like you, but I was kind of hoping I wouldn't have to talk to you again so soon. But thanks for joining us.
It's good to be with you. You don't have to talk to me. You know, the only time we come on is when you call and say, hey, Ambassador, we want, it's time for you to talk to me again.
Well, nobody else does. So, yeah, I got to lean on somebody to figure out.
We're having all of your friends in the podcast world. You know, we're talking to a lot of the podcasters, and we love the process. You know, it's not whether they agree with our policies or disagree with our policies. At least they allow me to get, you know, the U.S. message out without cutting and pasting and putting it in context and saying, well, here's what the ambassador really meant to say. So this works pretty nicely. So thank you very much for the opportunity again.
I want to first start off with today and how we were able to schedule this so quickly.
A planned joint ceremony between the U.S. and Canada celebrating the opening of the bridge has been canceled. Instead, Canadian officials say they will hold their own ceremony this Friday without the U.S.
So Canada felt that it was really inappropriate to continue the joint U.S.-Canada ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Gordie Howe International Bridge due to the recent announcement of potential additional 50% tariff on various sectors and goods, as well as just general trade tensions. Despite the joint event's cancellation, Canada is still planning to host a domestic-only event today. So what are your thoughts on that one?
Well, I mean, that was purely a decision by the Canadian government, you know, to have a Canadian event, exclude any Americans. You know, they'll have to explain their rationale for that. I know that coming off of the last couple of weeks, we've had a lot of, you know, I think pretty significant cooperative events. You know, we're just coming off of FIFA, 39 days of the biggest, you know, sporting event probably in the history of the world. We went through 39 days. Mexico, the U.S., and Canada, no security incidents, border crossings going off without a hitch, basically. I mean, I went through Vancouver and I went through the border checkpoint between basically between Seattle and Vancouver a year ago. And they were, you know, talking about if we don't get this right, we may have lines that are 10 to 12 hours long. And I think during the whole FIFA competition, they never exceeded more than an hour. So phenomenal cooperation with the border crossing folks, people on both sides of the border, people going into the U.S., people going into Canada. Obviously, the security people. I mean, going through all of this at a time when there are a lot of world tensions in that. And I don't want to disparage any country, but when we were in Vancouver like a week ago, I think the biggest problem was finding like 18 or 20 Australians on the street one morning after a celebration. And if that's the biggest problem we had, not bad. We worked with Canada on restricting people coming from Africa who had visited countries where Ebola was present. What we were finding is that the process that the U.S. put in place was a process whereby, people coming from any of those three countries said, hey, you're welcome back after 21 days, after you're out of those countries. And Americans are always creative. And so what some of these folks said is, we don't want to spend 21 days waiting. We're going to go to Europe. We're going to change our flight records and those types of things. We're going to get a new ticket. We're going to fly to Canada. And then we're going to drive to the U.S. or we're going to fly to Mexico. And with both Canada and Mexico, we got agreements that they would tighten their screening process because it was in the interest of all three countries.
Of course.
We don't want Ebola here in North America. So we got to an agreement with Canada and Mexico, and we all put in basically the same kinds of restrictions to get back to North America, keep us healthy, keep us safe. We got to an agreement to open the Gordie Howe Bridge. So it's like, bang, bang, bang. We're knocking these things out. And the threat of potential tariffs, and I think that's the key here, Canada decided to cancel the joint ceremony. I think it would have been a great ceremony, but it's happening almost right as we speak. I hope the Canadians have a successful ceremony, and that's where we ended up.
Hi there, Stuart. I talked to Premier Ford and asked him about Canada canceling the joint celebration. That celebration's still ongoing. You might be able to hear it, but it's just the Canadians that are celebrating. He pushed back and said it was President Trump's fault that the Americans were essentially uninvited. And I had to remind him it was Canada that canceled it.
I almost wish that I had brought like a prop ribbon so I could be like, well, Pete, this one's for you.
Yeah.
I didn't think that far ahead, though.
Yeah, but I mean, hey, that's what the Canadians wanted to do. Fine. We're excited. The bridge is going to open on Monday. It doesn't impact that. We're expecting, traffic to be going. I think it opens at noon on the 27th, which is exactly what we had agreed to a couple of weeks ago. And so, we're continuing to move forward on that.
I am curious. So you were uninvited from it. How did you find out, and what do you think the impact is, or how it could be perceived, how it looks across the border?
Well, I mean, I got an email saying that the Canadian government thought it was inappropriate to have a celebratory event with the United States of America, so the event was canceled. I'm like, okay, great, thank you. I now have Wednesday afternoon, Thursday, and Friday kind of free because we were going to go through a walkthrough on Thursday. But, it's like, okay, I'll find something to do for those 2.5 days. We're working with our Customs and Border people to make sure that when traffic actually starts flowing on Monday, that it goes smoothly and, that we have a successful opening of the bridge on Monday. And that's what we're focused on, how it's perceived. It's not a big deal in the U.S. I mean, there are people in Southeast Michigan, the Detroit area, and those types of things. Those folks, they're very interested in having the bridge open. We had invited a number of those folks to participate in the opening. But like me, we invited the congressional delegation. We invited the senators. The governor was coming, and they're like me. And I've been a congressman, and if you get handed, now what they've been handed is at least a half a day of a new schedule, saying, "Hey, fill this up." It's kind of like, yes, I can do that. Would have loved to have been at an opening. I think it would have been a lot of fun just to be standing on the bridge, at the middle of the bridge. And I don't know how high it is off the Detroit River, but it's, that would have been a spectacular opportunity. I know that I've walked the Mackinac Bridge, that they walk that, Americans can walk that every Labor Day. We've done that a number of times. Being on a bridge like that and being able to walk on it, that's always a fun event. So we thought it could have been a very fun event. Howard Lutnick was going to be there. Dominic was going to be there. And, it would have been an opportunity for, two of the really chief negotiators on the bigger context of getting to a trade agreement, being together, informal setting. Sometimes you get more work done in informal settings than you do in formal settings.
I think you usually do.
Yeah, but obviously that's an opportunity that has passed us by.
Yeah, I think my own thoughts there. There's a lot to say domestically about the communique, and that's been in the media like mad. But I think overall, it's a sad moment in terms of there being something that's net positive for both countries. So it's a good environment to kind of be together and remember the joint ventures, instead of having this tension. One thing, too, that was interesting to me, this came out yesterday, I believe it was, of Mark Carney. There were insider sources, no idea who they are, but people who had said that he was very caught off guard by the announcement of the additional tariffs that could be coming in the next 20 plus days here. And I'm curious, he had just been at FIFA with Donald Trump, and that all seemed to be relatively a good time. And when it comes to the Section 338s, those have never really been used before, and that's up for plenty of debate for sure. But why now? And was there any sort of specific trigger or conduct for reaching for that tool that has kind of sat unused for nearly a century?
We want to get to a trade agreement. We think it's best for the prosperity in the United States is to get to an improved trade agreement. You know, the process allowed for a 6-year review, which from a congressional standpoint, I'm going, yes, that's exactly what we need to do on so many different types of pieces of legislation, because you pass a piece of legislation, it's never as good as what you thought it was going to be. When a piece of legislation hits the real world, it doesn't necessarily operate exactly the way that the authors and the people who voted for it actually thought it was going to operate. And we should have put into place a lot of pieces of legislation that I voted for, and put in place some type of a review and a correction mechanism after the legislation hits reality. The president did that with USMCA, said, hey, I think this is a good agreement. We're going to move forward, but, we should review. That's what we're doing. I think what started this whole process is, I've got a list of, a page and a half of things that we believe need to be improved. They not working the way that we intended them or expected them to work from the original agreement. And so those are the things that triggered the real discussions and review, that started at least 9-10 months ago. And hoping to get through that list, address some other issues, we'd get an agreement, and we'd be able to provide the certainty to our businesses about, hey, if you're investing capital in Canada or in the United States, here are the rules of the road moving forward. If you're investing in Canada, and one of the reasons that you're investing in Canada is because you believe that investing in Canada to manufacturing certain goods or whatever, one of the big benefits is you've got this trade agreement with the United States. And if we're manufacturing in Canada, here are the rules by which the stuff that's made in Canada can be exported into the United States of America. And, so I think Canadians want that certainty as well, people who are thinking about investing in Canada. All of that brings prosperity, it brings wealth, it brings jobs to both sides of the border. That's what we're focused on. We want prosperity, we want wealth, and we want it on both sides of the border.
It's interesting hearing you say that, because for myself, I understand the rhetoric, the back and forth, how negotiations go. And there's posturing, of course, on all sides of government. And the general public typically doesn't have a great idea as to the conversations that are really going on behind the scenes. But it has been interesting because exactly what you laid out is the truth, right? To have a good, strong agreement between all nations or the ones that you are allied with, all of that makes perfect sense for both countries. And it's something I've said a lot in terms of there's been so much fear mongering about, actually even just the other day, I think this was actually just yesterday or the day before, Prime Minister Mark Carney was sitting with all the premiers, and he had made a comment that I thought was very inappropriate, where he was referencing Confederation and how at the time there was a threat of American invasion. And then in French, he said plus ça change, which is a French expression that means basically the more things change, the more they stay the same. And I thought that was a really interesting thing to say, because there seems to be so much rhetoric out there about, America wants to steal our water, they want to steal our oil, they're trying to annex us. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, we've had so much experience over the last 30 or 40 years. You can make the point that the prime minister has said himself is, that Canada hasn't paid its fair share of defense for 27 years. If you want to poke at Canada, you can say that. This is what your prime minister says. But I think it's more beneficial to look at the positive things, okay? Yeah, we do buy, roughly 3 million barrels of oil per day from Canada. That's about $120 billion per year. That's a positive thing. That's positive for the U.S. That is positive for Canada. We do a tremendous amount of manufacturing stuff and goods going across the border. Roughly $2.5 billion worth of product will cross the border today, tomorrow, Sunday, Monday. Okay, and that's continued during the last year. That creates lots of jobs, lots of prosperity on both sides of the border. We have an integrated ecosystem on automobiles. I consistently say that probably if America needs to buy a car, an extra car that we're not making in America, Canada could make a very, very compelling case that the best place to buy that first imported vehicle into the United States is to buy it from Canada. So you just go down the list, and we have great, trade relationships and coordination on agriculture. Then you go to defense, NORAD. NORAD has kept America safe. Has kept North America safe. I think during the FIFA game on Sunday in New Jersey, there was a story out that, NORAD had, they had rallied jets to go into the area because there must have been some perceived threats. And really what it was is probably, some crazy amateur pilots who hadn't gone through and checked where the no-fly zone was on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
And so, they're flying along, and the next thing they know, I don't know exactly what happened, but I know in certain cases that these folks are just kind of flying along and going to wherever they're going. And the next thing they do is they've got an F-18 flying next to them and
They
say,
look out the window. That must be a sight to see.
yeah, I'm sure. And it's like, why is that there? And, then however they do it, they communicate with the plane. It's kind of like, you're really not supposed to be here. But NORAD is doing the job exactly as what it's supposed to do. And I don't know if those were Canadian planes, Canadian pilots, or American planes and American pilots. But the NORAD mission is if there's a perceived threat against, either one of the countries, NORAD rallies whatever plane is the closest to confront it, to investigate it, and to deal with it. And it even happened at FIFA. So it's, so we've got all of this defense cooperation going on. There are so many positive things going on. Firefighting. I think the Canadian government the other day put out a statement thanking the 18 American firefighters that are fighting fires right now in Quebec.
Mm-hmm.
And because both countries right now have such a severe fire problem that there's maybe not as much interchange going on. But in the past, if there were a lot of fires in Canada, America would be moving resources to help our Canadian friends, and the our Canadian friends, when we had the fires in California, they brought down significant resources. So those are all the kinds of positive things that just keep going on each and every day. And yeah, obviously we got some issues on trade, but the thing that we want to do is we want to fix those and move forward. We do not want to acquire Canada.
Well, I'm happy to hear you say that on the record, and I look forward to hearing people explain how that actually wasn't what you meant, though.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I love it. I just need to stop doing it. I was, looking at some of the stuff that was out there, and then, when I explained how the Gordie Howe bridge process was worked and those kinds of things, and that it was a loan that it was expected to be paid back, and it was not Canada paying for the bridge. Uh, you know,
Yeah, there was
some
a lot of nuance there
yeah,
that,
some people will say, "Oh, look at there, he's lying. He's lying." It's kind of like, I don't know. I don't think so. At least in the United States and our economics, it's a very much different process that if I were buying a new home and I got you know, a loan for $100,000 from the bank, and they said, you know, you don't need to pay us back. Uh, you know, we're buying it for you. I'd say, yeah, that sounds like a good deal. They are buying it for me. They're spending $100,000, and they're giving me the house. So yes, they're buying me a house. If the bank, what they typically do is that they come in and say, yes, come in here and you can sign, a stack of papers, and at the bottom of it, the what we're saying is we're giving you $100,000, and so you can acquire this house, and we expect you to pay us back. Then it's kind of like, okay, they're not buying me a house.
yeah.
I'm buying a house, but they're facilitating that process, but they expect their money back with interest. So, but explaining that to folks, that was a lie. It was very, very accurate, but whatever. You're right. I'm sure that after today, people will go through here again and they'll say, "Oh, he was flustered, he
Yeah.
was rattled, and those types of things." And there he goes again, lying. But
Well, say he was
whatever.
pulling out his hair.
Yeah, I did that. Obviously, I did that in the first couple of weeks I was here. I think you remember when I came here, presented my credentials, I had a full
That is
crop
true.
of hair. It was beautiful hair. It was curly hair. Um, and yeah, shortly after I got here, it was gone.
So would you say then that, and I'm not necessarily saying that this is the intent behind, but that realistically this is more so the outcome of it. The threat of these new 50% is most probable. The reason behind it is that the pressure is going to help bring Canada to the table in a more productive manner.
Well, what we no the issues that the 338s are addressing are very, very serious. Okay,
Yeah.
they're the first set of tariffs is because of the alcohol ban. Okay, we are being treated, and that this is the basis of 338s in law. We can use, and the president has decided to implement the 338s when we are being treated differently than other countries in the world. So the first is American alcohol is being banned in Canada under 338 law. That means we can retaliate in roughly the same size and scope as what the U.S. is being damaged. So that's alcohol. The second category is on dairy, and we're being treated differently than other folks that you have signed trade agreements with. The dairy requirements are discriminatory against the United States of America. So again, under 338, the president, the U.S. has, under U.S. law, we have the right to retaliate. And the third is on auto imports. And I think somewhere I have the numbers. The dairy, we have a retaliatory tariff that affects $990 million. On alcohol, we have tariffs that affect $89 million of Canadian goods. And under autos, we've retaliated to the extent of $19.2 billion. So it kind of shows you the scope as we perceive it. 89 on alcohol, 900 on dairy, and then 19 billion on autos. So again, some of these things are just, the United States they're doing this. We're not doing anything. It's kind of like, no, these tariffs are a direct response to Canadian actions. And the hope is that we can address those issues by August 19. If we can correct those issues, if we can fix dairy, if we can fix the auto tariffs, the retaliatory tariffs, they're gone. The number one focus is address these specific issues, these three specific issues. Those tariffs are gone. Maybe there's another expectation that says if we can start putting wins on the board, that maybe we can take this momentum and expand it to the larger trade issues.
Now, I certainly understand the perspective of Canadians, and you've heard this as well, where they would push back to that and they would say, well, yeah, so what did the U.S. want us to do? Just roll over on our backs?
We can't keep rolling over for Donald Trump.
To those people who view it in that perspective, how would you try to kind of rationalize all of this to them?
What we're trying to do on the U.S. part is to develop a fair trading relationship. I mean, you can turn that question around very, very quickly. Okay, what do you expect Americans to do? You block dairy, you block alcohol, you block auto imports. What should we do? Just roll over and say, oh, thank you, Canada. No issues here. Let's act and say, okay, we've got these issues, both sides of the border. Obviously, we've got trade disputes. The desire here is to work through them. And that's what we're doing.
I've heard
that's what we're hoping we're doing.
I've heard a lot of rhetoric as well right now. This question was actually posed to the Prime Minister directly the other day about, there's been a lot of movement and ebbs and flows in terms of tariffs, not just on Canada, obviously, but with every nation that is being impacted by them, about how, there's been so many other deals that have been signed and then they're changed, or they don't have any weight to them, that sort of type of rhetoric. And so one of the things that I've been hearing more frequently as of late has been that you can't trust, even if you get to an agreement point, you can't trust because, well, Trump is just going to have an off day. He's going to cough too hard one afternoon and he's going to decide to increase tariffs on something else. He'll find another justification for it. So in terms of the trust for Canadians, how what about that would make it so that, let's say we get to an agreement, everything's signed, it's looking good. How do we go to a point without still worrying for a prolonged period of time that something could change dramatically and kind of catch us off guard? And next thing you know, we have even more tariffs now on another area that we had addressed.
It's very easy to trust America on this. USMCA has not been violated, regardless of what some Canadians say. The USA has not, as we've gone through this tariff, we have not violated USMCA. It is still in place. The president has been in office for roughly 19 months. And even though we've had this tariff dispute where we're saying certain things need to be revised, USMCA has been followed from the United States standpoint during that whole period of time. And that covers $2.5 billion of goods and services of goods going across the border each and every day. That has not been violated. So I know I saw the premier statements, the premier statement, they said, unlawful violations of USMCA. No, actually, there haven't been. We have followed the law, and we've we've used the features of USMCA that allow us or Canada or Mexico to respond if they see unfair or damaging effects happening. The agreement does provide for mechanism, and we've used them on occasion. Canada has used them. And so we have followed USMCA to the letter for the last 18 months. It's a pretty reliable ally, the prime minister has said, and this is not us saying it. Prime minister continues to say, we have the second best trade agreement deal with the United States because 85% of our commerce comes across the border tariff-free. Prime minister has also said, we haven't paid our fair share on defense for 27 years. I don't believe at any point during those last 27 years did we ever put Canada or North America's security at risk by being an unreliable and untrustworthy partner with Canada on national security. And I think, other than perhaps, the funding, I think in many ways, almost totally, we have seen Canada as a partner and a reliable partner. We haven't called into question. We've called into question, the lack of spending to the NATO targets, but we've not called into question Canada's reliability and partnership. We will always remember the contributions that Canada made while we were fighting in Afghanistan. We know that Canada was there, and so and we recognize that fact.
I am just on kind of on another point, maybe to pivot a tad here. But so, when was this? Last week, if I'm not mistaken. Was it this week? Oh, sorry if I got that wrong. I think it was last week with President Trump when he released a series of documents and reports about Chinese specifically interference in the United States of America.
This evidence shows that the election system we have dangerously exposes like levels never thought possible to hacking, exploitation, and foreign interference. Just as disturbingly, this vital information has for many years been covered up and hidden from you. The American people are beautiful, our great American people. But that all changes right now.
And that is something that Canada is all too familiar with. There have been various, commissioner reports. It's been signed off by judges that China did indeed interfere in our elections in 2019 and 2021. There were also various campaigns that have continued to go on. Most notably, though, even during the last 2025 election, there were Chinese campaigns on the popular app WeChat. There's a plethora of examples to give there. And I wonder, I always do this with my interviews. I'll always pose questions to my audience because I want to know what they're thinking and what questions they have that are not answered already. And so one of the very common themes, of questions I was getting from them when I informed everybody I was going to be chatting with you today was, how much does Canada and, Mark Carney saying the New World Order in Beijing back in January, and Canada as a whole, Canadian perception, there's been polling recently coming out saying that Canadians view China as more trustworthy than the United States of America, which is just like the scariest thing I've ever heard in my life. But how much does rhetoric like that, public perspective changing, things of that nature as a result to the tariff situation and how Canadians are being informed about it, how they're reacting to it, and what is the actual irritant of China specifically, knowing that it is obviously a great issue within America as well?
I think that as we move forward, we'll probably try to get some alignment on how we view China and how we treat China. I don't think that there's political rhetoric on both sides of the border. What America will look at is the kind of results that we get. Okay, what kind of trade deals, agreements are we going to get? Where is Canada moving on its defense portfolio? Is it is it going to continue to be closely tied to the United States, or is it going to decide to, to link up with other folks? We're going to look at exactly not the rhetoric, but the kind of results that our discussions and our negotiations lead to. That's the important thing. I read the same polls that you do, in that you read that Canadians think that China is, more reliable than the United States. It's kind of like, okay, you can ask us and say, how do you think about that? And it's kind of like, well, if that's what the Canadians feel, that's what the Canadians feel. What would you advise us on? Well, I don't know. I might suggest that you talk to people around the world who have the same kinds of values and democracy, human rights, markets, economic systems, and those types of things, and come up with a list of countries who have, literally gotten in bed with China from an economic standpoint, and see how it's worked out for them, and come up with a list of countries that come back and say, wow, we got into bed with China economically. We got into bed with them on the auto industry. We got into bed with them on the, on the technology stuff. We got into bed with Huawei, ZTE, and that has worked out awesomely for us. I can tell you how long that list is. Zero.
Yeah, no, it's not good. But I think that's also
if Canadians, if the public is directing Canada and saying, do this with China because they are much better than the U.S. That's for the Canadian public to decide. We can give Canadians information, the government information, and those types of things. And, then Canada will make up its mind what it's going to do. There are literally, the wrecks of companies around the world who have had their technology, stolen, their intellectual property stolen by the Chinese, because, they developed these business relationships with China. And, we also do assessments. You've got a lot of smart business people.
Yeah.
You've got a
Well,
lot, your government leaders, you may or may not agree with some of their policies, but they're smart people. And we do deals with China each and every day.
yeah.
Okay. We do trade with China. But at the same time, we go in very open-eyed about what the risks are, and we make sure that in the agreements that we reach with them, we are protecting our intellectual property, and we've got all kinds of laws about transfer of intellectual property, when it's appropriate, when it's not, so that we don't end up on our companies on a scrap heap because their technology is gone. Canada, you're smart enough to figure this out as well. Okay.
There was I don't recall if I shared this story with you the last time we chatted, so apologies if I did, but I was actually I was hosting a panel at an event with 250 business leaders, CEOs, things like that, and we had some private meetings beforehand, and I was expecting the entire time, and I was super grateful to be invited to these meetings as well. But I was expecting to just hear nonstop about Trump tariffs. Like, if you follow the news, that's what you think everybody's talking about, right? And I don't think tariffs were brought up a single time with any of these CEOs. And these are all businesses that employ 50 to 500 people in Canada. They're movers and makers. They are people who work in steel. Some of them work in auto. Some of them work as, they manufacture all sorts of little things. And at one point in the evening, when we had finished the private talks, when I was on stage, I asked everybody in the room. There was a crowd of probably, I don't know, I want to say around, at that point, maybe 200, 250-ish, somewhere around there. And I said, what do you think is the greatest threat to your business in Canada? Is it Donald Trump's tariffs or is it China? And I would say probably 85% of the room raised their hand for China, not anything at all to do with Donald Trump's tariffs. And I think it's something, their voices do matter and they are advocates in that regard. And so I would hope that that wouldn't be a big issue. There are obviously things that are concerning for citizens who are well aware of this stuff, which I think it's fair for people to talk about it and to be concerned about it. But it is obviously reassuring to hear even from your perspective as well that yes, this is an issue. We all know this is an issue, and we're going to try to figure this out, ideally jointly, right, for the betterment of North America.
Yeah, I mean, the threat here, economically, the threat is China. I mean, when I served on our intelligence committee, we constantly got briefings from the FBI of
Mhm.
Chinese economic efforts in the U.S. in terms of going to our research universities, going to our leading corporations, and trying to access the most advanced technologies, the most advanced research that was going on, and getting and stealing it and taking it
Mhm.
back to China. Okay. And obviously, they start stealing your research and those types of things. Uh, that's huge. That's real economic value because all of a sudden it's research they don't have to spend money on. It's development they don't spend money on. American companies, Canadian companies, they've taken all the risk. And in some cases, China is just the beneficiary of the work and the investments that Americans and Canadians have made. But you talk about the business community, yeah, because they're investing billions to protect their intellectual property.
Mhm.
Um, but they've been very, very consistent. They recognize the threat from China, but they are also I mean, the business community has been awesome in terms of supporting the economic relationship between the U.S. And Canada. All right. Again, it's made a lot of wealth, a lot of jobs on both sides of the border, and they want to continue to see that happen. And with all of the emerging technologies that are out there, whether it's the emerging stuff in energy, AI, data centers, and these types of things, this is very, very fertile ground for the U.S. And Canada to partner on. You just saw the significant investment, I think, by Meta into Alberta for a data
Mhm.
center. This is not small. This is, I think, $13 billion into an investment. There's a data component. You get the data, you get the computing power and all that. It'll have an impact on AI to power it. You're going to need a lot of energy that's coming out of Alberta. So it's kind of like, oh, this is a win-win. You know, Canada moves forward in the technology sector. America moves ahead because, yeah, we get this capacity built into one of our companies, and it's a win-win all across the board.
I have like two final points or so with you. I wanted to also, in referencing China, there is an additional 10% tariff that's impacting several different countries as it pertains to forced labor. I know that Canada already has a bill in Parliament that matches the United States protections against this. It obviously hasn't passed yet, so we'll wait and see how that all unfolds. But do you have any comments on that one? I think, in the country right now, it's tough because there's a lot of, and of course, this whole conversation, it's not to say that tariffs are irrelevant and they don't impact people. Of course they do. There are real people who they are impacting, obviously. But I wonder there's so many people where it just feels like Canada is just getting hit and hit and hit, and so even this week, they're 60% total of additional potential tariffs, potentially all hitting at the same time, and it's very noisy. So what's your commentary on that one?
It's very, very noisy. There is a carve out in the language that came in on forced labor. Uh, USMCA compliant products are exempt.
So that's good.
So,
Okay.
yeah, so it may affect some Canadian products, but it'll be a very small segment. It will be somewhere outside of the 85-90% of the product that comes across the border that is USMCA compliant. So again, it will not that will not impact the vast, vast majority of U.S.-Canadian trade.
I'm curious as well, just to kind of wrap this up, because there's so much nuance, obviously, and it can get confusing, and there's so much rhetoric, and people's feelings get involved, and it's very chaotic, it seems at times, and it feels also as though that is absolutely propped up by the media. And again, that's not to say that it's not like this is an ideal situation for Canada and the US, right? We're working through something, and we will hopefully get to the bottom of it soon. But so what can Canada at this point in time, as far as you see it, actually do to honestly negotiate a trade deal with the United States of America? Do you feel as though that's something our officials even want to do? Like, how do we refresh and restart here and try to get this sorted? I mean, ideally by August 19th.
Yeah, like the first thing is resolve the issues around August 19th. All right. The dairy thing has been around for a long time. Remember, most of these items, okay, alcohol, that's been around for 15 months. I actually give the president a tremendous amount of credit in terms of he hasn't done anything for 15 months about the alcohol.
And it's been an irritant that whole time. So
It's been an irritant the whole time. The dairy, that's been an irritant for much of the last 6 years because it was covered in the original USMCA agreement, and we believe that it has been undercut by actions in terms of how the quotas and those things are applied to U.S. dairy products. So that's been much longer than that. The retaliatory tariffs on automobiles, I'm not quite sure exactly how long they've been in place, but I think it's been in the neighborhood of just about a year with real economic impact. Somewhere I've got the numbers here in terms of how far auto parts are down. I think they're down by what? Auto parts are down. Canadian imports of U.S. motor vehicles decreased by approximately 22%. All right, in the last year. So that is, it's Canada has put in place some things that have created significant damage in the U.S. economy, and so let's fix those. In the next 3-4 weeks, we've got less than 4 weeks to get this done. But so there's irritants and retaliatory steps going both ways across the border, in the context of $2.5 billion crossing the border each and every day, tariff free. All right. So yeah, these are important. They have an impact on people, but it's not like you just gutted USMCA. These are important issues. They have an impact. You start talking about $5 billion, you start talking about certain kinds of products and components and these types of things. Yes, they are real. They're an impact, but it's not an ongoing, bang, 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 you know, to the economies of both countries. Again, I think you get a very different perspective from your mainstream media, the clickbait that they put out there, and these types of things. I believe that we can get these. I'm hoping we can get these resolved. I think there's a framework to do it, and I'm very hopeful that as we resolve these and figure out how to get to deals and agreements on this, and we still do it every day. Like I said, we came to an agreement on the Gordie Howe Bridge. We did that relatively quickly, I think 4 or 5 weeks. We got to an agreement on Ebola. That was like 48 hours. We figured out how to do FIFA, and we planned on that for working together. We've worked it together on that for a year. And each of those there's a different complexity to the problems, different people that are working on them. But every day we're making agreements with the Canadians, and hopefully we can fix these by August 19th so that those things do not take place.
Well, U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra, I'm sorry you got uninvited to the ribbon cutting today, but thank you for coming to explain some of this to us.
Well, like I said, I miss being on the middle of the bridge. I think that would have just been a fun place to be today. I'm looking forward to Monday when the traffic starts going across the bridge, and I expect that probably within the next couple of weeks I'll be crossing the bridge and trying it out. So, but thanks for your time. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for a great discussion. We'll stay in touch.
I'm Jasmine Laine. Thank you so much for watching. Like this video, subscribe to the channel so you never miss a future episode, and comment your thoughts down below. Bonus points if you share it with some of your friends as well who may need a little bit of reassurance, perhaps. Get away from the fear-mongering. Stay grounded in reality. It's all really good for you. I will talk to you very soon. Have a great weekend.